Laughter from the Christmas party echoed from the Prescott mansion, but what I found wasn't my daughter. It was a ghost in a flimsy party dress, trembling under the first snow of the season. They said she was just seeking attention, but I knew they had tried to extinguish her. My apartment in Seattle always had its own order. Everything was minimalist, tidy, a legacy from the years I lived and breathed Taekwondo. The trophies were packed away in boxes, the white dobok hung in the closet, but the discipline remained in the way I folded my blanket every morning, in the decisive cuts of my knife as I chopped vegetables. Only one corner of the apartment was allowed to be affectionately messy, the wall covered with photos of Clara. Clara as a newborn, tiny and red. Clara on her first day of school, clutching a bear-shaped lunchbox. Clara in her graduation gown, her smile so radiant it seemed she could conquer the world. She was the only soft part in my angular life, the promise I made to my late husband that I would always protect. The flight to Boise, Idaho this time was a surprise. Clara hadn't come back to Seattle for Thanksgiving. She said Dan's work was busy. Her voice over the phone sounded so distant. So I booked a ticket on my own. A mother has the right to see her child at Christmas. Plane is about to take off. I love you and can't wait to see you, I texted her before switching my phone to airplane mode. No reply. She must be busy preparing, I told myself. The Prescott family was very particular. Their Christmas party was certainly no simple affair. But during the 2-hour flight, a vague sense of unease began to creep in. It was like a small crack in a pane of glass. At first, you barely notice it, but then you can't stop looking at it. I called Clara as soon as the plane landed. Voicemail. The Boise airport greeted me with a blast of frigid air and light snow. As I was struggling with my rental suitcase outside the terminal, a familiar voice called out. "Miss Sarah, is that you?" I turned around. A tall man in a police uniform was looking at me, a surprised smile on his face. I squinted. The short hair, the broad shoulders, but the eyes I could never forget. Mike? Mike Riley! Oh my God, look at you! Mike was one of my first students, a skinny, often bullied boy who found his confidence on the dojang floor. Now he was a mature police officer. "What brings you here?" Mike asked after a few friendly greetings. "I'm here to visit Clara. She married a man from here." The smile on Mike's face vanished. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Clara Prescott?" "Yes. Do you know her husband's family?" Mike hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They're a well-known family around here, ma'am. Judge Arthur Prescott, her father-in-law, has a lot of influence, even in retirement." He looked straight at me, and for a moment, I saw the same worried but honest student from years ago. "Just be careful, okay? Things here are a bit complicated." Another patrol car siren blared, and Mike had to get back to his duties. "It was great seeing you," he said hurriedly, but the worried look in his eyes lingered. I stood there alone in the bustling airport. The premonition was no longer vague. It had a name. Prescott. I drove the rental car into the city as the snow began to fall more heavily. The Christmas lights twinkling on the streets looked beautiful, but they couldn't warm the growing chill within me. I called Clara again, still voicemail. The flight of hope was now flying straight into a storm. The Prescott mansion emerged from the falling snow like a ghost ship. It was enormous, made of gray stone, with windows glowing with a warm light. But the warmth seemed artificial, like a perfectly arranged stage. I parked my rental car at a safe distance, feeling its smallness and insignificance compared to the cold grandeur of the place. A uniformed maid opened the door. Not Clara. Not Dan. Mrs. Hale, please come in. Everyone is in the living room. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh pine and expensive wine. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses came from a large room. Dan appeared, a glass of wine in hand, his smile looking like it was pinned to his face. "Mom, you made it. Great. Clara's not feeling well. She's resting upstairs." "Not well? What's wrong with her?" I asked, a sense of unease rising. "Another headache," Eleanor Prescott, Clara's mother-in-law, interjected. She glided past, a cloud of cold perfume wafting from her. The girl always has an excuse to not greet guests. I felt my blood boil, but I held it back. I needed to see my daughter. "Where is her room?" "Let her rest," Dan said, his tone a bit sharp. "Make yourself at home." But this wasn't home. I felt like an intruder. I said I needed to use the restroom and headed towards the hallway, trying to find the way upstairs. As I passed a half-open library door, I heard my daughter's name. I stopped, hiding in the shadows of the hallway. "I don't know how Dan puts up with it," a sharp female voice said. Victoria, Dan's sister. "4 times? 4 times, and she can't keep a baby. There must be something wrong with her." "The problem is she's lazy," Judge Arthur Prescott's voice came, deep and authoritative. "The Prescott bloodline needs a strong heir, not some fragile drama queen." I put my hand to my mouth, trying to stifle a sob. "Don't worry, Dad," Dan laughed, a cold laugh. "She'll get over it. She always does. A little drama, and then everything will be fine." They were talking about my daughter's pain, about the miscarriages that had torn her soul apart, as if it were an inconvenience, a performance. A primal anger flared within me. I no longer cared about politeness. I rushed up the stairs, looking for Clara's room. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. She wasn't here. A wave of panic hit me. I ran down the hallway, opening every door. The bathroom, the guest lounge, the study. No one. And then, through the large window at the end of the hall, I saw it. A small, huddled figure on a chair on the back porch, in the middle of the ever-thickening snow. I rushed downstairs, ran to the back door. The French glass doors were locked. Through the glass, I saw Clara more clearly. She was wearing only a thin silk party dress. A light layer of snow had covered her hair and shoulders. She sat motionless, her wide eyes staring into the void. Her lips were purple. Her whole body was shivering violently. "Clara!" I screamed, banging on the glass door. "Clara, open the door!" She didn't react. As if she couldn't hear, couldn't see, as if she had left her own body. I looked back into the living room, where the party was still going on, the laughter still echoing. None of them cared. None of them knew she was slowly dying out there. Standing there, in the cold darkness of Boise, I felt more alone than ever. This pain couldn't be mine alone. I wonder, if you are listening to this story, where are you in the world? Have you ever witnessed an injustice so cruel that it left you speechless? Don't be silent. Like this video if you empathize, and share your story in the comments, because every voice is a ray of light against the darkness. A mother's rage is a force to be reckoned with. All the discipline, all the control that Taekwondo had taught me suddenly vanished, replaced by a primal instinct to protect my child. I didn't scream anymore. I took a step back. I took a deep breath, channeling all my strength and anger into one point. And then I delivered a precise side kick right next to the lock. The sound of splintering wood and shattering glass rang out, drowning out the music and laughter. The security alarm blared. The door burst open. I rushed out onto the porch, took off my coat, and wrapped it around Clara. Her skin was as cold as ice. "Mommy's here," I whispered, holding her tight. "Everything's going to be okay." As I carried her into the house, the entire Prescott family and their guests poured out, their faces a mixture of astonishment and fear. "What the hell are you doing?" Dan yelled. I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze burning with a fire they had never seen. "I'm doing the job you were supposed to do," I growled. "I'm saving my daughter." The war had officially begun. The security alarm tore through the fake festive atmosphere. As I carried Clara, cold and nearly motionless, into the house, the entire Prescott family stood frozen at the living room door, the wine glasses in their hands looking ridiculous. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Judge Arthur Prescott roared, his face red with rage. "This is breaking and entering." "Look at her, putting on a show again," Eleanor said contemptuously, though there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. I paid them no mind. I laid Clara on the nearest sofa, her body as limp as a rag doll. I knelt, trying to warm her ice-cold hands. "Clara, sweetie, talk to me." Dan rushed towards me, his face twisted in fury. "You have no right. This is my house, and that's my wife." "Then why is your wife outside in the snow, wearing only a thin dress, while you're in here celebrating?" I yelled back, a mother's fire finally erupting. "Because she likes attention," Dan screamed, and then he said the cruelest words I had ever heard. "She's doing this to torture me, isn't she? Just like all those times she accidentally lost the baby, always the victim." A horrifying silence fell over the room. Even the alarm seemed to quiet down. Dan's words hung in the air, venomous and irrevocable. Even Arthur and Eleanor looked shocked. I slowly stood up. I looked my son-in-law straight in the eye, and in that moment, I no longer saw a misguided man. I saw a monster. "You are a monster," I said, my voice frighteningly calm. I wasted no more time. I lifted Clara, her body surprisingly light. "We're going home," I whispered into her snow-dampened hair. I walked straight out the front door, past the stunned faces of the Prescott family, the alarm still blaring behind me like a chaotic farewell. The flight back to Seattle was a blur. Clara fell into a deep, dreamless sleep in my arms. But when we arrived at my apartment, her silence was more terrifying than any cry. She didn't speak. She didn't eat. She just sat by the window, looking out at the gray Seattle streets, but I knew she wasn't seeing anything. Her eyes were empty. I cooked her favorite meals, placed them in front of her, but she didn't touch them. I had to feed her soup spoonful by spoonful, as if she were a newborn again. My safe haven had become a silent psychiatric ward. The warrior in me, who had confronted an entire powerful clan, was now completely helpless against an invisible enemy, trauma. After 3 days of silence, I took Clara to a therapist, a woman named Dr. Evans, whom a friend had recommended. "Clara isn't faking it, Miss Sarah," Dr. Evans said. After the first session, her voice gentle but firm. "She is surviving. Her mind has disconnected to protect itself from overwhelming trauma. This is a classic symptom of battered person syndrome." As the doctor spoke, images began to flash in my mind, fragmented memories from things Clara had mentioned over the phone, things I had dismissed at the time as normal marital complaints. The second miscarriage, Clara lay in the hospital sobbing. Dan sat beside her, not holding her hand, but scrolling through his phone. "Again?" he said without looking up. "Are you sure you even want a baby?" The fourth time, after the doctor delivered the bad news, Dan didn't come to the hospital. He said he had an important meeting he couldn't miss. That night, he came home and complained that Clara had ruined their travel plans. Dr. Evans continued, "The cruelty isn't just in the words. It's in the indifference, the invalidation of the victim's emotions. Her husband's family, especially Dan, constantly told her that her pain wasn't real, that she was just being dramatic. When that happens repeatedly, the victim starts to believe it. They start to believe they are the problem." I sat there in the quiet therapist's office and finally understood. This wasn't an unhappy marriage. This was a systematic campaign of soul destruction. I had rescued Clara from that house, but the real battle had just begun. I wasn't just fighting the Prescott family. I was fighting to reclaim my daughter's soul. A week in Seattle felt like a month. Every day, I saw another small piece of Clara break. She would startle at the sound of the doorbell, flinch if I accidentally dropped a spoon. Dr. Evans's diagnosis had given me a name for the enemy: emotional abuse. And I knew that to defeat that enemy, I couldn't just use love. I needed justice. I went to a lawyer specializing in civil suits, Elena Vance, a petite woman with eyes as sharp as a razor. After hearing the whole story, she said only one thing: "We'll sue." The lawsuit was filed, and the Prescotts retaliated. Their response was not just swift, it was brutal. A thick stack of documents arrived at Elena's office, represented by one of Boise's most prestigious law firms. They didn't just deny all allegations, they countersued me. They accused me of kidnapping Clara, of maliciously causing familial alienation, and even implied that I, with the instability of an out-of-control mother, had caused her psychological condition. It was a calculated, scorched-earth tactic designed to tarnish my character before the trial even began. Meanwhile, in Boise, Mike Riley was paying the price for his kindness. He called me one evening, his voice weary. "They're putting on the pressure, ma'am," he said. "My captain called me into his office. He talked about influence, about not rocking the boat. Judge Arthur may be retired, but his shadow still looms over this entire police department." "Are they threatening you?" I asked, my heart clenching. They said if I continue to involve myself in the Prescott's family matters, my career would be in trouble. They threatened to suspend me. "Mike, you don't have to." "I filed an official report on what I witnessed that night," he interrupted, his voice full of determination. "That's my job, and you taught me never to turn my back on the truth." Mike didn't stop there. He began to investigate quietly, using his spare time to look for former housekeepers, gardeners, anyone who had worked for the Prescotts and might have witnessed something. But the Prescotts didn't just fight in the courtroom, they started a war in the shadows. First came the anonymous, typewritten letters sent to my apartment. "Go back to where you came from, you troublesome woman. You'll never win." Then one morning, I woke up to find all 4 tires on my rental car slashed and a spiderweb crack on the windshield. I reported it to the police, but they said there were no witnesses, no cameras, a case of petty vandalism. But I knew it was a warning. Clara became increasingly panicked. She was terrified by every strange noise. The progress she made with Dr. Evans seemed to be erased by each new act of retaliation from the Prescotts. Gathering evidence also became a nightmare. Elena and I tried to contact nearly a dozen former employees of the Prescotts. Most hung up as soon as they heard the name. One elderly, retired maid agreed to meet us, but when we arrived, she just cried and shook her head. "I can't," she whispered. "They'll destroy my son. You don't know what they're capable of." Fear was a powerful weapon, and the Prescotts wielded it skillfully. I felt isolated, besieged. The whole world seemed to be against my daughter and me. Late one evening, when I was almost at the point of despair, the phone rang. It was Mike. "I found someone," he said, his voice excited. "A former nanny named Maria. She quit 5 years ago after a disagreement with Mrs. Eleanor. She moved to Oregon. She's scared, but she said her conscience won't let her stay silent." A glimmer of hope. "What did she see?" I asked. "She said," Mike's voice lowered, "she was there after Clara's 3rd miscarriage. She heard Dan screaming at her, calling her a useless disappointment. Finally, a witness, someone willing to speak the truth." The war was still long and arduous, but that night, for the first time in weeks, I felt I was no longer alone. We had a weapon of our own. The courtroom in Boise was cold and imposing, with oak-paneled walls and pale fluorescent lights. The space was designed to evoke a sense of solemn justice, but to me, it just felt like a trap. On one side, the Prescott family sat in a neat row. Arthur, Eleanor, Victoria, and Dan, all dressed in expensive clothes, were accompanied by a team of 4 lawyers who looked like they had just stepped out of a magazine. They whispered, smiled, and exuded confidence. They didn't look like defendants. They looked like they were presiding over a board meeting. On the other side, there was just me, Clara, and Elena. Clara huddled in her chair, small and fragile. She wore a simple wool dress and looked like a sparrow that had strayed into a peacock enclosure. I sat directly behind her, my back straight, a habit from the dojang, trying to transmit some strength to her through my gaze. The trial lasted for several days, each day a meticulously orchestrated session of psychological torture. When Clara was called to the witness stand, the Prescott's lawyer, a man named Davies with a slick smile, didn't ask about pushes or shoves. He attacked her mind. "Miss Miller," he began, his tone sweet, "isn't it true that you saw a therapist for anxiety even before your marriage?" "Yes, but," Clara stammered. "And after each unfortunate miscarriage," he continued, emphasizing the word unfortunate with false sympathy, "did you describe yourself as emotionally uncontrollable to your doctor?" I was grieving," Clara whispered. "So the answer is yes?" Davies pressed. He turned to the jury. "A woman, ladies and gentlemen, who admits to a history of instability and emotional outbursts." Elena repeatedly objected, but the damage was done. Davies had painted a picture of Clara not as a victim, but as a hysterical, weak, and unreliable wife. Clara nearly broke down on the stand, tears streaming down her face. But the deadliest blow was yet to come. Elena called Maria, the former nanny, to the stand. I felt a surge of hope. Here it was. The truth would be revealed. Maria walked up, an elderly woman with eyes that were always downcast. "Mrs. Maria," Elena asked, "did you ever witness Mr. Daniel shouting at or treating Miss Clara cruelly?" Maria hesitated. She glanced quickly at the Prescott family, where Arthur was staring at her, his eyes as cold as ice. "No, ma'am, never," Maria said, her voice a whisper. "He was always patient. It was she. She was the one who was often irritable, crying over small things." My world collapsed. I looked at Maria, the woman who had promised to tell the truth, and I saw betrayal. They had bought her. They had used money or threats to extinguish the last spark of her conscience. When it was my turn, Davies turned me into a domineering, hostile mother-in-law. He focused on me breaking down the door, kidnapping Clara. He made a mother's act of rescue look like a criminal offense. My anger was twisted into irrational rage. On the final day, the judge read the verdict. His voice was monotonous, emotionless. Based on the evidence presented and the testimony of the witnesses, the court does not find sufficient grounds to conclude that a systematic pattern of emotional abuse occurred. Each word was like a hammer blow. The request for divorce is granted. Regarding the division of assets, due to a lack of evidence of fault on the part of the defendant, the marital assets will be divided according to the prenuptial agreement, under which the majority of the assets belong to Mr. Daniel Prescott. The judge's gavel came down, the sound dry and final. It ended everything. Justice had failed. I looked over at the Prescott family. Dan had a smug smile. Arthur nodded in satisfaction. They had won. They had used their power and money to crush the truth. Clara sat motionless, silent tears flowing. She hadn't just lost a lawsuit. She had just been told by the entire system that her pain was not real. I gripped her hand. It was ice cold. We had lost miserably. The judge's gavel was still echoing in my head as we stumbled out of the courtroom. The Prescott family walked ahead of us, Dan and Victoria on either side of their parents, a perfect family portrait of victors. They passed us in the hallway, and Dan stopped. He looked at Clara, who was trembling in my arms, and gave a smirk. "See?" he whispered, his tone cruel. "No one believes a crying, unstable little girl. Now you can go home and continue failing in silence." That remark, so venomous and unnecessary, was the final matchstick. "You bastard!" A roar echoed down the hall. I turned to see Mike Riley, who had been sitting quietly in the back row throughout the trial, lunging forward. His face was red, his eyes blazing with an uncontrollable rage. He had shed his uniform, his career, everything, and was now just a human being standing up for justice. He swung his fist, aiming straight for Dan's smug face. But before his fist could connect, a fragile figure threw herself in between. "Don't, Mike, don't!" Clara screamed, her arms outstretched to shield Dan, the husband who had destroyed her. "Not for me, please." Her tears were streaming, but in that moment, she was not weak. She was trying to prevent another tragedy. It was then that a series of camera flashes went off. The reporters who had been preparing to leave had turned back. Cameras, cell phones, all pointed at us. They had captured everything. They captured Dan's smug face. They captured Mike's enraged fist. And most importantly, they captured the image of Clara, the victim of the lawsuit, sobbing as she tried to protect her own abuser. That picture, more tragic and powerful than any testimony, told the whole truth. That evening, the video was on every news broadcast. The next morning, it was all over social media. The story was no longer a complex divorce case. It had become a simple story of the strong versus the weak, of cruelty versus compassion. And the public chose a side. A wave of outrage rose against the Prescott family. Dan's company issued a press release announcing his indefinite suspension for an internal investigation, a polite way of firing him. The charities Eleanor frequented began to remove her name from their donor lists. Even the local bar association announced it would re-examine Judge Arthur's contributions to the legal community. The reputation they had built over a lifetime collapsed in 48 hours. For the first time in months, I saw Clara smile, a real smile. She sat on the sofa, reading comments online. Thousands of strangers were sending her words of encouragement, calling her brave, saying they believed her. "They believe me, Mom," she whispered, her eyes shining. "Finally, someone believes me." She began to talk more, to eat more. She even agreed to go back to see Dr. Evans. I thought we had won, that a new dawn was truly coming. But I was wrong. It was only a false dawn. A few days later, the news of Mike's suspension was announced. Clara read it. The smile on her face vanished. "It's my fault," she said, the familiar, empty tone returning to her voice. "If I hadn't sued, he wouldn't be in trouble." "It's not your fault, Clara," I tried to reassure her. "It was his choice." But she didn't listen. She started reading the negative comments, the ones defending the Prescotts, the ones calling her a gold digger, a family destroyer. For every 1,000 words of support, just one criticism was enough to plant doubt in her fragile mind. The wound from the trial and the accusations had not healed. It had only been temporarily covered by the public's satisfaction. Now, as that satisfaction faded, the wound bled again, and this time it was infected with a new poison, guilt. She began to believe that, just as Dan had said, she was the source of all the trouble. The dawn had come, but it brought with it a shadow that was too large, and I was afraid that shadow was about to swallow my daughter whole. Public opinion is like a tide. It rises with force, sweeping away everything in its path. But then it recedes, leaving behind a quiet beach and the wreckage. After a few weeks, the name Prescott was no longer a hot topic. The internet's outrage had found new targets, and in that quiet, the Prescotts began their revenge. They no longer acted openly. They acted like venomous snakes, striking from the shadows, targeting the most vulnerable. The first victim was Mike Riley. He called me one evening, his voice devoid of any life. "They suspended me indefinitely, ma'am. It's over." "But why? You did nothing wrong." "They opened an internal investigation," he explained, his voice full of bitterness. "They dug up a case from 3 years ago, a minor procedural error I made. They turned it into a major issue, saying I lack judgment. It was all perfectly orchestrated. There's no way for me to fight it. Judge Arthur's shadow is too long." The career Mike had painstakingly built, the pride in his uniform, all of it was taken away simply because he had dared to stand on the side of justice. Next, they targeted me, not with threats, but with whispers. The owner of the Taekwondo dojang where I taught a few classes for seniors called me, her voice full of apology. "Sarah, I'm so sorry, but a few parents have pulled their kids from other classes. There are rumors. They say our studio is associated with the Prescott scandal. They're afraid of trouble. I can't let my business be affected." I had lost my sanctuary, my connection to the only passion I had left. They didn't attack me. They isolated me. And Clara witnessed it all. She was the first to read the news about Mike on a local police forum. She sat in front of the computer for hours, reading every malicious comment. That cop deserved it. Getting involved in someone else's family business. There must have been a personal grudge. She also heard my phone call with the dojang owner. I saw her standing at the doorway, her face drained of all color. The burden of guilt began to weigh heavily on her fragile shoulders. She believed it was all her fault. She was a curse, a source of all trouble. If I didn't exist, she started saying things like that, her voice empty, then Mike wouldn't have lost his job. You wouldn't be in trouble either. Don't be silly, Clara. I tried to hug her, but she recoiled. This isn't your fault. It's their fault. But she couldn't hear me anymore. She only heard the accusations in her head, the ones Dan had planted there for years. You are the problem. Everything is a mess because of you. She started refusing to see Mike. When he came to visit, she locked herself in her room. I can't face him anymore, she cried to me. I destroyed his life. She stopped talking to Dr. Evans. She sank back into silence. But this silence was more terrifying than before. It was no longer empty. It was filled with self-loathing. One evening, I brought dinner to her room. She was sitting on the bed, looking out the window at the falling night. "Mom, do you think if I didn't exist," she said, her tone frighteningly calm, "everyone would be happier?" My whole body went cold. I sat down beside her, taking her ice-cold hands. "Clara, don't ever say that. You are my world." She turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw nothing. No hope, no pain, just an endless void. "But your world would be better without me," she said. I realized that, although I had won against the Prescotts, I was losing another, much more important battle. The enemy was no longer in Boise. The enemy was now inside my daughter's mind, and it was an enemy I didn't know how to defeat. The next day, I woke up to a strange feeling. The silence in the apartment was no longer heavy. I heard a soft clattering in the kitchen and smelled coffee. I walked out and saw Clara. She was standing by the stove, wearing a bright sweater, her hair neatly combed. She was frying eggs. "Morning, Mom," she said and smiled. A small, tired smile, but a smile nonetheless. "I thought I'd try to eat a little today." A wave of relief and hope washed over me, so strong it almost made me dizzy. "Oh, Clara, sweetie." "I'm okay, Mom," she said, placing a plate of eggs on the table. "Really?" And I believed her. I was so desperate that I was willing to believe any glimmer of light, no matter how faint. That day, we had an almost normal day. We watched an old movie on TV, and Clara even giggled at a few funny parts. She talked about maybe going back to her pottery class, that she missed the feel of clay in her hands. Hope, a dangerous and sweet emotion, began to sprout again in my barren heart. I thought, maybe we had weathered the storm. Maybe the dawn was truly coming. That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, Clara came into my room. She didn't say anything, just came and hugged me. Not a casual hug. She held me tight, clinging to me as if to imprint the feeling on her skin. "I love you, Mom," she whispered into my shoulder, her voice choked. "You're the best mom ever." "I love you too, sweetie," I said, patting her back, my heart filled with a warmth long lost. "Everything's going to be okay. We'll get through this together." She nodded into my shoulder, but didn't look me in the eye. "Yes," she whispered, "it'll be okay." She let go, smiled one more time, and then quietly went back to her room. I stood there for a moment, a feeling of happiness and relief spreading through me. My daughter was back. Our battle was over. That was the last time I spoke to her. The next morning, I woke up and didn't see her in the kitchen. I thought she was just sleeping in after a day of regaining some of her energy. But as the sun rose higher and the apartment remained eerily quiet, a chilling feeling began to creep into my heart. I knocked on her door. No answer. Clara? My heart began to pound. I turned the doorknob. Not locked. I pushed the door open. The room was perfectly tidy. The bed was made. Her clothes were neatly folded. And on the pillow, there was a white envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. Clara's handwriting, soft and familiar. Dearest Mom, please don't be sad. I just wanted to free everyone. I am a burden. I have caused so much pain to you, to Mike. Now Mike will be at peace. You will be free. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. I love you more than anything. Goodbye, Mom. Clara. I didn't scream. The sound died in my chest. The letter fell from my hands, floating in the air for a second before landing on the soft carpet. My entire world, everything I had fought for, everything I had hoped for, turned to ash in that moment. I had won the battle with the Prescott family, but I had lost the most important war. I had rescued her from that house, but I couldn't save her from her own mind. My body collapsed. The pain was not a wave. It was an ocean, engulfing me, robbing me of air, light, and all feeling. All that was left was an empty, cold, and endless void. Clara's funeral was on a Tuesday morning, under a gray Seattle sky and a cold drizzle. It was small, just a few close friends and Dr. Evans. Mike was there too. He stood in a corner, under a leafless tree, looking like a shadow of his former self. Our shared grief was too vast a chasm for any words to cross. The Prescotts did not come. They sent a large, lavish wreath. I had it taken away before the service began. Clara's death caused a small stir in the community. A few articles, some condolences online. But then, like the tide of public opinion before it, everything quickly fell silent. The world kept spinning, indifferent to a soul that had been extinguished. And I sat alone in the empty apartment. The silence had returned, but this time it was permanent, heavy, and unbearable. I had won. The Prescott's reputation was ruined. Dan had lost everything. I had gotten the justice I sought. Justice had arrived, but it came in the form of a grave. I tell this story not to be pitied, but so that Clara's memory will not fade into oblivion. If her story has touched you, please don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel as a promise that you will not be silent in the face of emotional abuse. Every subscription is an affirmation that together we will protect the other Claras out there. I sit here, holding a photograph of my daughter, with the radiant smile I will never see again. I had won all the external battles, but I lost the most important one, the battle to reclaim my daughter's soul. Justice had arrived, but it did not bring peace. It only left a silence where my daughter's laughter used to exist.